Excellent. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's nice to be back in the store. It's been a while, and this is a really great way to start off our July programming here at Green Apple. My name is Cara. I'm the event coordinator here for Green Apple. Thanks. Thank you. I'm the events coordinator for Green Apple, and it is my distinct pleasure tonight to welcome Rachel Heng to celebrate the release of her novel, The Great Reclamation. Let's give a hand for Rachel. Let's also give a hand for our interlocutor tonight, Rita Bullwinkel. Big hand for Rita as well. Awesome. Thank you for joining us both here in person and online. Hello, online audience. We are broadcasting from San Francisco. We are on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land, and we hope that you join us in our pledge to turn land acknowledgement into action by donating either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization each time you hear, or in my case, speak a land acknowledgement. Thank you so much. I have very brief business before we get to the fun part of the evening. First, now is a good time to silence your cell phones if you haven't already. I would say photo taking is encouraged, but I'll leave that to our author's discretion. Please do check out our full event calendar on our website at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season coming up ahead, and including the event that you are currently attending. And last but most certainly not least, the restroom is behind us. It is available after the event and not during the event for obvious reasons. It is also available to attendees of our event during event time, just because it's like the one space that employees of the store have off of the floor, and we like to maintain the integrity of it for them. So thank you for respecting that. We appreciate it. But you came to a show, you should be able to use the restroom. Without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce the two authors that are joining us tonight. First, Rita Bullwinkel is the author of the forthcoming Headshot, yay Headshot, and Belly Up, which garnered a 2022 Whiting Award. Bullwinkel's writing has been published in Ziziva, Tin House, The White Review, Conjunctions, Bomb, and many other places. She is an editor-at-large for McSweeney's, the deputy editor of The Believer, and a contributing editor for Noon, as well as the creator of The Oral Florist. She lives in San Francisco and teaches at California College of the Arts and University of San Francisco. Let's give another hand for Rita Bullwinkel. And last but most certainly not least, born and raised in Singapore, Rachel Heng is the author of the novel Suicide Club, which was translated into 10 languages. Her short fiction has appeared in The New Yorker, Glimmer Train, McSweeney's, and other places. She received her MFA from the Michener Center for Writers and has received grants and fellowships from National Endowment for the Arts, Sewanee Writers Conference, National Arts Council of Singapore, and many others. She is currently an assistant professor of English at Wesleyan University, and her book, The Great Reclamation, is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give another hand for Rachel Heng. Hello.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much to Green Apple Books for having us, and thank you to Rita for agreeing to talk to me about my book today, and thank you to all of you for coming out on this foggy, cold day, which is, I'm told, typical for summer in San Francisco, so I'm glad to experience it for myself. I'm going to read a little bit and then we'll just do a Q&A. So I'm going to read just from the beginning of the book, maybe 5 minutes or so, and then we'll dive in. Decades later, the kampong would trace it all back to this very hour, the waves draining the light from the slim, hungry moon. Decades later, they would wonder what could have been had the Lee simply turned back, had some sickness come upon the father manning the outboard motor, or some screaming fit befallen the youngest, forcing them to abandon the day's work and steer their small wooden craft home. Decades later, they would wonder if any difference could have been made at all, or would past still coalesce into present, the uncle dying the way he did, an outcast burned to black and bone, in a house some said was never his anyway. The kampong still destroyed, not swallowed whole by the waves in accordance with some angry god's decree, as the villagers had always feared, but taken to pieces and sold for parts by the inhabitants themselves. If the little boy, the sweetest, most sensitive boy in the kampong, would nevertheless have become a man who so easily bent the future to his will. Perhaps he would have. Perhaps this had nothing to do with the hour, the boat, the sea, and everything to do with the boy. But these questions could only be asked after the wars had been fought and the nation born, and the sea, once thought of as dependable, eternal, stopped with ton upon ton of sand. These questions would not occur to anyone until the events had fully passed them by, until there was nothing to be done. All were fossils, all was calcified history. For now, though, the year was still 1941, the territory of Singapore, still governed by the Angmors as it had been for the past century, and the boy, very little, very afraid, still crouched in the back of his father's fishing boat. Lia Boon was 7, already a year late, as Hea liked to remind him. Hea, now 9, had taken his first trip on his 6th birthday. But while Hea at 6 had been a boy with plump tanned arms and strong calves like springs that could propel him over the low wooden fence at the perimeter of the kampong, Abun at 7 was still cave-chested with the scrawny limbs and delicate hands of a girl. Despite as much time spent in the sun as his brother, Abun's skin retained its milky pallor, as fine as the white flesh of an expensive fish steamed to perfection. Hence his nickname, Bawal. At the sound of his brother's voice, Abun sprang away from the boat's side. In the weak moonlight, the sea around them appeared as viscous black oil, roiling gently in the breeze. He shuddered to think what could be waiting beneath its pleated surface. Scatter, Bawal. Hea clambered toward Abun, stepping over the ropes and nets that littered the floor of the small boat. He moved with a careless, threatening ease, like the foot-long monitor lizards that scuttled through the tall grass around the kampong. Hea grabbed Abun's shoulders, turning his torso out toward the sea. Wow, so brave. Hea pushed his brother suddenly as if to tip him out of the boat. The sea lurched up toward Abun's face, and he clawed at the side, letting out a small whimper. You know, Hea said, Pa never tell you everything about your first trip out. He never tell you about the night swim, huh? Hea went on to say it was a tradition that every fisherman's son went through on his first trip, that soon Pa would stop the boat in the middle of the empty sea and tell Abun to get out into the water. All around them pulsed the ocean, and up above, blank and starless, was the unending sky. The clouds scraped the thin moon, the darkness deepened. Abun thought of the fish, bright-eyed creatures with silver bodies of pure, spasming muscle. For the past year, it had been his terrible job to help sort them, still alive in the nets when his father came home. Horrified by gasping, desperate mouths and manic, shiny eyes, he had run away crying at first, but the jeers of his brother and the stern, clicking tongue of his father eventually reconciled him to his task. Thus, Abun had learned to present a blank face, to control his expression, even when he stepped by accident on a slimy, stingless jellyfish on the beach, and the wet matter oozed through his toes. He had perfected the containment of his distaste for the unruly water that so dominated life around him, felt in the pit of his belly like a cold glass marble he'd accidentally swallowed. But what Hea was suggesting now, to plunge his small self into the wide black sea, this he could not bear. Thank you.
Rachel, it is such an honor to be in conversation with you about this amazing epic. Okay, so much of this book questions what constitute a home. Is it the people we love? Is it the ground we walk on? What happens when the ground we walk on because of change, because of progress, becomes unrecognizable to us? What do you think constitutes home, and what constitutes home for our main character, Abun?
Oh my gosh, that's such an existential question that I feel like it's something I think about all the time for myself as a person who grew up in Singapore, studied in the US, worked in the UK, came back to the US, and lived in various different places, right? And I don't know what constitutes home. I think for the people in this book, obviously, it has a very different meaning because they didn't have that social mobility, right? It was a very different time, and they lived very different lives. And I think for them, home was a way of life, a place, right? Certain things that you think of as eternal. So like the beginning of the book says, the sea is eternal, the land is eternal. There's certain things that move at a certain pace or a certain rate of change as it has for millennia, and so you don't expect those things to suddenly look different, or suddenly, to see the sea that you've gotten your livelihood for so long to literally be shifted out miles away from your home, right? Like, people have dragged their boats down this sandy beach for like generations, and suddenly you have to like put them on wheel carts to like drag them kilometers out to like reach the sea, because you're like, why is this, how can the sea move? That's just like kind of unfathomable to a person, I think. Even today, with all the technological change, it's still something that I find striking and sort of magical and terrifying, right? So back in the 60s, I'm sure, even more so. And so I think home for the characters in the book is very much linked to the environment and kind of the way of life that they live, but also the people in their community. So the question is what the community thinks of the change and how the individuals react once the community decides that this is something that they want to do. And that's something that the book explores from different perspectives of the family, of the village, of the community, as like these tensions develop in response to the changing landscape. Because some people think, oh, well, this is a good thing, right? This is progress, this is modern, this is how we kind of advanced it. Like, I want my kids to go to better schools, I want to have running water, I want to have electricity. Like, moving the coast out is a good thing because you'll kind of drag the country into this modern age. And then others are like, how can you condone that? Because this is our home, this is where we live, this is the landscape that we love, right? So I think it means something different for every character in the book.
I'm so glad you brought up, of course, what comes up so frequently in the book, the changing coastline. As I was reading the novel here in my home in San Francisco, I kept on thinking about the ways that you wrote the ocean and wrote the sea reminded me so much of how I relate to the ocean here. So in this book, the ocean, the sea is such a large character, vividly and electrically. It felt like the sea almost had a body in a way that feels unique to people who perhaps grew up in coastal cities like this one here in San Francisco. And maybe it's because I grew up here in the city, but I kept thinking about the way you described the changing coastline in Singapore and the dredging and the filling in of the islands, and how such a similar thing happened here in San Francisco as well, all in the Dog Patch and in Marin. And so I was curious to know, I don't know the answer to this, did you grow up near the ocean, and what is your relationship to the sea?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I'm so glad that it resonated that way, because I think I noticed, how things repeat in your writing. Like, the sea always comes back into my work. And I was telling someone earlier, it's not that I grew up next to this idyllic, beautiful tropical island sea. Like, in Singapore, the sea is very brown and it's like full of container ships. And it was only until I was like 11 years old and went to like Indonesia or something, and I was like, oh, the sea is supposed to be not brown. It was like this revelatory moment. I was like, oh my God, this place is paradise. You can it's clear and there are fish, I think my image of the sea was never a romanticized kind of pure one. It wasn't a place of beauty, but still I had many happy moments by the beach, because I would go there as a child, and it's kind of a park, and you'd see the boats and be excited and stuff. So I did grow up on reclaimed land, actually, in Singapore. And I remember I went to primary school, which is like elementary school here, and having a teacher say like, oh, the land that we're on right now, this used to be the sea. And I think that was probably the first seed of this book many years ago, when I was 7 years old. And I just remember that sticking in my mind as a child, and how things kind of latch on in your head at that age, because they can be something innocuous in an adult sense, can be so terrifying to you at that age. And that was one of those things. I was like, how can this have been the sea? Like, that's just not possible. Like, what does that mean? That means anything could be anything, right? There was this feeling of like the ground falling away beneath my feet, or like nothing was stable, or like what was reality? And I think that is a feeling that permeated my entire life in Singapore, because the built environment is so readily changing all the time, as part of this narrative of progress and necessity, right? Because there is this kind of narrative and mythology of like, oh, we're a small country, we've faced lots of obstacles, we need to do this, like it's necessary in order to achieve economic progress. And that was something that I think growing up I had never really thought about or questioned, but still felt as being something that felt off, or like slightly surreal or slightly strange. And then I think after leaving really crystallized on me, because every time I went back, I wouldn't recognize it. Like places that I had known would be so different. And then I would notice like, oh, things my mother had told me, like, oh, I grew up in this area, but I don't know exactly where because they changed all the roads. You know, the degree to which it shifted. And then a place where I grew up when I was a kid in public housing, they had knocked down all the flats. And it was basically, you would go back and the grass had grown back. And there were just trees around the empty spaces where the buildings used to be. So there would be these moments of, you know, kind of grief almost where, you know, it shifted so violently before your feet. And I think with the sea, that was very much something that I experienced viscerally as a child.
Oh, Rachel, hearing you talk about the changing urban landscape really makes me think about the work of Renee Gladman, who we just touched on briefly before the reading, who writes these similarly incredibly seductive and immersive novels that often delve very specifically in like the disorientation of not recognizing the architecture of a place. I have so many questions, but I'm just so curious. I mean, I feel like I see Renee Gladman's work directly in conversation with the Great Reclamation and their interest in a changing urban landscape. Was she someone you read while writing? What other writers were you reading while writing this? Or maybe you don't read other writers while writing. I'm so curious.
I've never thought about that, but I actually did read Renee Gladman for the first time when I was writing this. I was in a class with Claire Bay Watkins on the postmodern novel, and we read Event Factory. If people know, it's like an incredible book that's like about, you described it perfectly, like the disorienting physical landscape, right? And she uses like syntax, like actual sentence syntax to sort of subvert your notions of like logic and spatiality and I don't know, all of these like really smart things. So I did read it while I was writing this book. I was like in the middle of maybe the first draft when I read it, but I didn't see a connection in that way. So I love that what you just said. I wanted to be an architect when I was a kid.
That is amazing.
Which I feel like a lot of writers do. Many writers have like secret wannabe architects, and it like, yeah, and I was told I shouldn't be an architect because my mother said girls shouldn't be architects because you have to go into construction sites. And so that was the sort of traditional upbringing I came from. She's like, you can't be an architect, like women can't be architects because you have to wear a hard hat and go into construction sites. She's like, no. Instead I became a writer, so you know, it's not much more acceptable. But yeah, I think I've always been interested in like architecture and like built landscapes. Maybe because I grew up in Singapore, I don't know, I think a lot of Singaporean artists, like photographers, visual artists, like writers, all grapple with similar themes because like we are dealing with this like drastic change that happens so viscerally around us. And maybe throughout like a lot of modern Asia as well. I see this in the work of like peers in other countries. But when I was reading, I guess I did read a lot of research about urban planning and kind of how modern Singapore was conceptualized. And then I read books on a lot of like geography and kind of how land reclamation happens, like very technical stuff, like in Amsterdam, how they would use like polders to like, you know, stuff like that. But as for fiction, not really that much to do with land or architecture, probably more historical fiction. And I read a lot of books that were in the vein of the speculative, so that use speculative elements to deal with complicated histories. And I guess it's not spoiler to say there's some vanishing islands in my book, so it's like slightly magical, and that has to do with, you know, at first it's magical and then kind of becomes real and so on, as a metaphor for the way in which like land can be fickle in Singapore. And so I was very interested in like books that dealt with like very tangible socio-historical phenomena, but through some form of speculative element. And so books like The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead.
Yes, I see that completely.
I think The Old Drift by Namali Sapel.
Amazing,
and,
yeah.
The Man with the Compound Eyes by Wu Ming-yi, who's a Taiwanese writer that's translated. That's amazing. And then other historical fiction books that kind of dealt with intergenerational stories and like big worlds and a lot of world building, like Edward P. Jones's The Known World. I'm trying to think, like so many books. Yeah, I'm sure more will come to me as we talk.
Okay, so in addition to questioning what makes a home, this novel also questions, I think, what it means for a narrative to be a love story. And so I wanted to know, do you see this book as a love story?
I didn't originally. Do you see it as a love story?
I don't know. I don't know if I know what a love story is as a genre.
Like my publicist is here, like the publisher, like
the publishers are like, this is
they're like,
a love
it's a love story, guys. No, but it is a love story in that there is a romantic plot line in it. So like quite literally, I guess.
The love is so deeply felt and complicated.
Yeah.
You know what makes a love story is it's very complicated.
Yeah,
The love is very complex.
I hadn't thought of it as a love story. I thought of it as like a coming of age story or like a generational story. But then when they said it was a love story, because the main character falls in love with his childhood best friend, and a lot of the story spans about 30 years, and they kind of form different political alliances. They they go to school, their class changes, and they kind of associate with different groups, and they're forced to reckon with that through their intimate relationship with each other. So in that sense, there is very much a love story in it. I guess it is also a love story, not just in a romantic sense, but in the sense of like the love for one's family and one's home. Like I do think it is a story that's full of love in many different ways, but like not necessarily, and tenderness, not necessarily just romance, but the ways in which all those different things push and pull against each other, like that your love for your partner is in conflict with the love for your family, with your brother, for your mother, for your home, your country. So in that sense, it is very much a love story, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you put it in that context, because I do think there is so much love in the book that is outside the romantic domain. Yeah. Just for the people in the back, no pressure, but there are all these wonderful seats right in the front. If you would like a seat, please feel welcome to come up front. Don't feel like you need to stand. It's, it's like
the rule. If you come after a certain time, you have to stand.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not asking for a spoiler, Rachel, for those who haven't read the book yet, but I did want to reference, or I'm curious to know if you feel like we can talk about this. I think we can, but I'll leave it up to you without a spoiler. But in some ways, at the end of this book, when we leave Boone, he feels right at the beginning of something. And this felt so masterful to me, because I feel like something that unifies electric and amazing and indelible endings to me is when books like this one have this feeling of a narrative Ouroboros, where the ending is like looking back at the beginning, and you're right. It feels like you're actually not at the end of something, but you're looking out into a whole other narrative that's not we the reader have not even yet been exposed to. And so I was wondering if you ever have thoughts of revisiting Abu narratively past the end of the book, or if there was another ending past what we have. Is this the end? Will we ever see him again? In your own narrative mind, do you revisit him after the moment where we leave him?
No, I don't. Yeah,
I love that.
It's very sad. We don't. Because I think Abun is based on a Singaporean of a specific generation that I think I grew up knowing. Like this was sort of like my uncle, or like someone, not specifically an uncle, but like, one of my uncles, or like just like a certain type of person that I would encounter. And I just wondered, how did you become like this? Like, how did you come to hold these beliefs? Like, you didn't grow up this way. What happened for you to get there? And so I think that's where Abun came from. And so that's what the story is about. It's him growing up and kind of this coming of age. That's why I call it a coming of age story, because I think it's about figuring out your moral landscape, right? And the choices and the trade-offs that you're willing to make. Like, you get to a certain age and you're like, okay, like, I realize that the world requires certain trade-offs, and these are the ones I've chosen. And so Abun gets to that point, and once he gets to that point by the end of the book, I'm like, that's it. He may still change in the future, but to me, the story that I was interested in was how he got to that point. And I feel like I already know him now.
Amazing. Like, that's his moral landscape that will stick with him.
I think so, yeah.
Incredible.
But maybe in 10 years I'll change my mind.
Okay,
I'll say this now and it's recorded, and then I'll come back and they'll be like, you said in 2023
I know.
with Rita Bullwinkel.
Let them hear it. Okay, so I'm so interested to hear more about your relationship with the speculative elements of this book. I do feel like, as a reader, when Abun has this particular uncanny ability to know where these certain islands are, and no one else can find them. And as a reader, I was kind of like going through in my mind how magic is this ability in a way that in some ways felt true to life for a lot of talents to me. Like a lot of there are so many things in life where you're like, how can this person accomplish this? And there might be some reason outside of the unreal, but I'm interested to know more about how the islands existed for you narratively and how you see them kind of like going in and out of the real and the unreal and where that border might be.
Yeah, I think, man, that's a tough question. And it's difficult because I think I never fully articulated it. Like, it wasn't a rational thing that I came up with and then imposed it upon the book as I was writing. It came up very naturally, the islands. And I think, broadly speaking, the book is about a certain loss of enchantment or a loss of mystery, which in a way I feel like, to be harsh about it, is the Singaporean project, is the result of a technocratic government that is very economically successful, necessitates this kind of destruction of the unknown, right? Which is an extension of the colonial project, which came from the British. So that I think the islands for me occupy the space of the unknown. And so that was why they were very important to me in the beginning, that they were unknown and they were, in a way, they defied logic. Because so much of what comes after, so much of the success of Singapore is a result of logic, right? Of this extremely intelligent, efficient, pragmatic government that could out-logic everyone else. And so I wanted there to be an element that pushed against that kind of had a chance of resisting that. And I think because the islands are fickle and they're magical in this way, they were this independent entity that couldn't be controlled. And the book is in some way about control, right? It's about disciplining landscapes, controlling landscapes, and people by extension. And so that's a very high level way in which I didn't think about it narratively. So when people ask me are they real? Are they magic? I'm I don't know. What is magic?
That ambiguity seemed very true to life to me, and in some ways very realist.
Well, and it mirrors the way in which later on, when the land is reclaimed and there is this creation of land from nothing, it does seem magical, right? But that's created through sheer technological will. And so it's just different kinds of magic, but it introduces the idea of land being fickle or having agency in some way.
Yeah. It makes me think so much about so much of the Bay.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about local Bay Area history, but I think it's something like the Bay used to be 3 times its space now. Something like that.
Oh, wow. And they made it smaller?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
All of the coastline, especially in Marin, is all artificial.
So they made it bigger?
No, the bay was larger, and then they built in, especially in the north.
The bay, the water. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, Singapore grew 30%, 25% since the 1960s.
Wow.
And Singapore is half the size of New York City, including all the boroughs. So it's pretty small, and it just grew that much through land reclamation.
Yeah. This makes me want to read about the science of dredging.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Oh my gosh, Rachel,
they made me take how they do it out of the book because it's too much dredging. I was no, we don't want so many construction scenes.
So how do they do it?
I don't actually know. I'm not an engineer, and my friend Shang Yang Fang, who's a poet, is also a civil engineer, so maybe he can explain it. But I think, funnily enough, we have to study this in schools, in geography. So I have very vague recollections of secondary school geography where I had to study land reclamation. But they dump a whole bunch of sand into the ocean or the lake or whatever it is, and then they put concrete pillars into it. I read the last time this was from a long time ago. So and then they plant trees on it to like firm up the ground. And then I think 10 years later, they chop down all the trees and they build buildings on it. So fun fact, like if you've seen Crazy Rich Asians, the very fancy hotel with like the boat on top of it, that's built on reclaimed land because that used to be like a swamp that they filled in. And when I was a child, you would drive past it and you would just see trees growing on it because that was in the like tree root, formation phase. And then one day, I guess they just chopped down all the trees and then they built this very fancy hotel where they now use as the backdrop of Crazy Rich Asians.
It's incredible to me that something as organic as the root of a tree is like the best technology we have to create like the foundation for a building. That is wild and amazing and poetic.
Beautiful, right?
It's beautiful. Yeah, that nature is to like, no, the best you have is actually this thing that I
know, and then like the violence of them chopping them all down.
Yes, and then like the bones of the root. Yeah, wow, that image, wild. Okay, Rachel, you've already talked a little bit about this. I'm going to lump all these questions into one, which is, so much of this book seemed like there was just such a rich well of research. So I'm curious to know, more about that research process, maybe where it started and what that, what kind of like system you had for it. Do you have a system? Are you someone who just reads and then puts it aside, or do you have how do you research in your work? How did you research in this book specifically?
I read a lot. I did research for maybe like a year before even starting writing anything. So just like reading lots of history books, geography books. I spoke to like experts, so I sought out very kind academics. I would just cold email people. Another fun fact, you can just email random people at universities and tell them you're writing a book, and usually they'll talk to you because they like talking about their research. So that's really fun. And so I spoke to like a mangrove expert at some point.
Amazing.
He's like the foremost mangrove conservation expert in Southeast Asia. That was really fun. And like various historians. And I did a lot of digging in the National Archives for like oral history interviews, just to like get a sense of like, oh, what was the flavor like of life? Like, how did it feel like to be in those spaces? So a lot of like, whenever I got stuck, I would just go read another interview. And I didn't have a system. I would just like pick random names and just like read stuff. Or sometimes I would like search for certain terms, like certain neighborhoods I was interested in, and see like when people would mention it. And then when I was done with all the research, I didn't have a system. I just started writing. I think I just needed to know enough to feel like I could inhabit the world. And there's a great Toni Morrison quote that I always I have written down near my desk. That's like in an interview when she talks about writing Beloved and like doing the research for that. She said like she needed imagination to shore up the facts, and I love that feeling of like shoring up. And so I think
so oceanic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like then turning away from like all the facts and all the data and all the like timelines, and then feeling free to like imagine characters in it. And then obviously it's sort of an iterative process, because then I would find something that I'd be like, oh, I don't know if this detail works, or like, would they have co-ed schools in this time? So would he have met this, and then I would go do more research and come back, and sort of going back and forth.
Okay, audience, this is your 3-question warning. I have 3 more questions for Rachel. And then if you guys have questions for her, we'd be delighted to know them. Okay, Rachel, what other books of fiction about the history of Singapore do you love?
One of my favorites is State of Emergency by Jeremy Tiang, and that's published by a Singaporean press, but you can definitely get it in the US. And it's set in the 1950s during the state of emergency that was declared, basically by the British colonial administration when it was part of this anti-Chinese communist. Anyway, it's very long, detailed history that I won't get into, but it's a beautifully written story. It is also a love story, in more ways than one. And he's an amazing writer and translator, so I recommend that. One of the books that I read when reading this was Rawa by Isa Kamari, who's a Malay writer in Singapore, and it is about this subject. It's about people living by the coast and being forcibly moved from their homes. And then, can I name one that's like not fiction?
Yes.
Yeah, there's
I
mean, anyone who's interested in Singaporean history, there's a book called Singapore Biography, which is written by Mark Frost and Yume Balasingham Chow, and it spans the Singaporean history from the 14th century up to modern day Singapore.
Incredible.
And it's very readable, like it's very exciting. It's not doesn't feel like a history book. It feels like you're reading fiction, like lots of little short stories with like a lot of detail, but also like with a lot of human labor. So yeah, 3 books.
Love it. I have to read them. Okay, Rachel, what is one question about this book that no one has asked you yet that you wish they would?
I don't think I had. It might have been tell us about dredging, and you asked me.
Okay, great, I win.
But no, I feel like I think people have really engaged with the book wonderfully in all the ways.
I wasn't sure, sometimes like I feel like I've worked on projects and there's been like this obscure piece of research that either didn't make it in but I love that it's all in the book. We've touched on dredging.
The love story.
Poetry collection forthcoming, the love story. Okay, so my last question for you is what are you reading now? What are you excited about?
Oh gosh. Well, I am at the amazing Headlands residency.
Incredible.
Those of you who don't know it and you're writers, you should apply. If you're not writer, you should go, or writer artist, you should apply. If not, you should visit it and possibly support it if you live in the Bay Area, because it's in the Marine Headlands and it's incredible.
I think they have a pretty amazing like concert series and event series.
So they get married there. It's like all kinds of stuff.
Yes.
But yeah, so I'm there at this residency now, and that's why I'm in the Bay Area. Thank you very much, Headlands, for bringing me here. And so long story short, I'm saying that because I have a lot of time and I've been reading a lot of books, which is amazing because I also have a toddler at home, and so I do not read books normally anymore. And I just finished one of Mary Gaitskell's collections.
Incredible.
Not Bad Behavior, sorry. Because They Wanted It, and I love that. That was amazing.
It's a good title.
Yeah, and I also read Annie Ernaux's The Years, and I will totally butcher this name, but it's the Norwegian writer Vigdis Hjorth. Do people know? It's a book called
No, I haven't read it.
Will and Testament. It came out in 2019 in English, and it's the story of a family having a inheritance dispute, which sounds very unrelatable. And when I started reading it at first, I did think so, but it's incredible, and it's not really about the inheritance dispute. It's about family stuff in a way that's like almost taboo and truthful. And yeah, it's just it's really, really good. So I read that in I think 2 days or something. And more stuff, I'm sure. I'm just forgetting what the other books I read were. Yeah.
Nothing like a good reading streak. Yeah. Audience, do you have questions for Rachel?
Covered everything.
We've covered everything.
We've stunned them into silence.
Okay, I have another question for you. This book, one of the things that I loved about it is that it's so epic in proportions. And I'm not sure, we haven't talked about this, so I don't know how... I feel like epic is kind of a loaded word. And I don't know, I'm curious to know how you feel about it. Do you identify it as an epic? Are there other epics that you love? And I think the thing that is pushing me into the realm of, in my mind, while I'm reading it, thinking of it as an epic, is its combination of the personal made political, and this really momentous time in history told through the deeply personal relationships between a small group of people. I think that's what pushes it into that realm for me. What's your relationship to the epic?
I like epic things.
I do too. I do too. Yeah, right?
I think maybe it can get coded as long and boring, maybe. I don't know. People think of War and Peace when they hear epic. But to me, epic just means something that feels big.
The Great Reclamation. I know this isn't. The Great Reclamation is so much better than War and Peace.
I feel like I can't comment on that.
I know that people love it.
I love Anna Karenina. It's and that's a very long book.
I just feel like you can it's good. I'm not sure. Oh no,
I must confess I never managed to finish War and Peace. Though I love Anna Karenina.
I feel like you can just tell they were writing.
It's just the war scenes are very long. I like everything between the war scenes.
Very gossipy. Yeah. I don't know.
It's like very blow by blow. It's like someone's on a horse. And
I hate that this is going to be on the internet.
We should stop.
We should stop.
Yes. No more about War and Peace. Incredible novel.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's funny. When I wrote this, I think I wanted it to feel very big, and I originally conceived of it as intergenerational. I thought it would take place over 3 time periods, over 3 generations, so that you would follow all these characters, and it would feel really large and expansive and like contradictory, but also like complementary in all these ways. But then I ended up getting very attached to Arbun, and actually most of the story you are following Arbun. Like you do get, it is polyphonic and you get other characters, but Arbun is clearly the main character, and you're only with him from ages 7 to 28 or so. So it's not even that long a span of time. So I'm actually quite happy that people think it's epic, because to me, I wanted it to be epic and it didn't quite get there. It got long enough that I was like, okay, I need to stop now. I think that's the book is done. Otherwise it's going to be way, way longer. And I didn't manage to get in everything I wanted to, I think. But it hopefully still feels how I wanted it to feel, which is big and expansive and covering all those things you said, like the personal with the political, against the backdrop of great societal change.
It absolutely felt that way to me. Rachel, it has been such an honor to be in conversation with you. The Great Reclamation, it's amazing. It's epic. Buy it.
Thanks, Rita.
Amazing. Such an honor.
So much. That was amazing. Thanks, everyone.
Can we give one more hand for Rachel Heng and Rita Bullwinkel? Thank you so much. Well, now that we're here. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're great. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you, Rachel. We're really excited to have Rachel back because we got to celebrate Suicide Club with you. 2017 or 18? 2018. Yeah. And of course, Rita, we're always happy to have you as our neighbor and part of our literary community. So thank you for being here and joining Rachel, and thank you all for joining us this evening. We have copies of both of our authors' books at the front. You can find them there, and I'm gonna have you sign at the back desk, Rachel, and I think if you ask politely, Rachel will sign a copy of the book for you, and if you have any other questions, let me know, and if not, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Thank you.